Hello, my friend, and welcome. Tonight we drift toward the quiet music of falling water, into the endless hush of currents finding their way down through stone, mist, and shadow. Waterfalls are not simply water falling. They are patient sculptors, gentle drummers, and quiet keepers of secrets that most of us walk past without ever truly hearing. Behind every curtain of falling water lies a story written slowly across centuries, one drop at a time. There is something almost dreamlike about the way a waterfall holds so many small wonders inside its endless motion. Hidden beneath the roar and the spray, deep inside the stone it carves and the air it stirs, a waterfall performs quiet feats of physics, biology, and chemistry that rarely make their way into daylight thought. If you enjoy these gentle journeys into the hidden life of nature, feel free to return again and let this soft voice carry you towards sleep. But for now, let your shoulders soften, let your breathing slow, and let the sound of falling water settle over you like a blanket. Let's begin. Many waterfalls fill the air around them with invisible charged particles that some believe ease the mind. As water crashes downward and breaks apart into fine droplets, the collision of air and water can separate electrons from molecules, producing what are known as negative ions. These charged particles drift outward in the spray, mixing into the surrounding air in concentrations far higher than in an ordinary room or open field. Some researchers have suggested that breathing air rich in these ions may correspond with a sense of calm, though the full story of why remains only partly understood. What is certain is that standing near a waterfall often feels different from standing anywhere else, as though the air itself has been softened and cleaned by the endless collision of water against water, water against stone. The sound of a waterfall is rarely a single note. It is a blend of thousands of tiny impacts layered together into something that feels like silence even though it is technically noise. Each droplet striking the pool below adds its own small sound to the whole, and when enough droplets fall together, the individual impacts disappear into a smooth, continuous hush. This is part of why falling water is often used to help people rest. The broad, steady frequency range covers and gentles other sharper sounds nearby, smoothing out the uneven noises of the world into something the mind can rest against, rather like a single hand quieting many small voices at once. Where sunlight reaches through the mist that waterfalls throw into the air, color often appears out of nowhere. Tiny suspended droplets bend and scatter the light passing through them, splitting it into the same spectrum that a raindrop creates high in the sky. Because the mist near a waterfall is so dense and constant, these rainbows can appear low, close, and almost touchable, sometimes circling fully around the base of the falls rather than arching distantly overhead. Depending on the angle of the sun and the thickness of the spray, more than one arc can appear layered together, faint bands of color hovering in the same drifting cloud that dampens the moss and stone nearby. Waterfalls are rarely fixed in place forever. Where the water strikes rock again and again, it wears away softer layers faster than harder ones, undercutting the stone above until it eventually collapses and the entire waterfall retreats upstream. This process can take centuries or millennia depending on the hardness of the rock, the volume of water, and the depth of the plunge pool below. Some of the world's most famous waterfalls have shifted measurable distances upstream over recorded history, leaving behind long gorges as evidence of where the falling water used to be. In this quiet way, a waterfall is both a place and a moving event, arriving from somewhere and slowly traveling towards somewhere else across an almost geological hush of time. Not every waterfall takes the same shape as it falls. Some drop in a single unbroken column, called a plunge, losing contact with the rock face entirely as gravity pulls the water down in a clean, straight line. Others hug the stone the entire way down, following every curve and ledge in what is called a cascade. Some spread wide and thin like a fan opening outward, while others narrow into thin, trailing ribbons that sway gently in the wind, resembling a horse's tail more than a solid sheet of water. Still others fall in a series of distinct steps, each one pausing briefly in a small pool before continuing its journey down to the next ledge. Each shape is a signature written by the particular combination of rock, water volume, and slope that gave rise to it. Some waterfalls exist entirely out of sight, hidden far beneath the surface of the ocean, where cold, dense water meets warmer, lighter water in certain narrow straits. The heavier water can sink and cascade downward along the seafloor in a slow-motion waterfall, far larger than any seen above ground. One such underwater cascade between Greenland and Iceland moves an immense volume of water downward over a vertical drop that dwarfs anything visible in daylight, yet it produces no sound that any ear could hear and no mist that any eye could see. It flows in near-total silence, guided only by differences in temperature and salt, a waterfall built entirely from invisible forces rather than open air and sunlight. When winter settles over a waterfall, the water rarely stops entirely. Instead, ice begins to build outward from the edges, forming pale curtains and frozen pillars around a hidden core where liquid water often continues to move. Spray that lands on nearby branches and stones freezes almost instantly, layer by layer, until fragile ice sculptures grow along the entire cliff face. Beneath this frozen shell, sound still travels, and if you listen closely near a frozen waterfall in deep winter, you can sometimes hear a faint, muffled rush trapped just behind the ice, as though the waterfall has only wrapped itself in a colder, quieter coat rather than stopping its work at all. Some small fish can climb straight up the face of a waterfall, defying a force that seems as though it should make such a thing impossible. Certain species of goby use a combination of a specialized mouth and a modified pelvic fin to create two separate points of suction, inching upward one small movement at a time along wet, vertical stone. This slow climb can take hours and carries them past drops that would be fatal to fall from, yet they continue upward toward calmer waters above, driven by an instinct that values whatever waits at the top of the falls more than the risk of the climb itself. Beneath many waterfalls, the endless swirl of water carries small stones round and round in tight circular currents, and over time these spinning fragments carve smooth, rounded pits into the solid rock below. These formations, sometimes called potholes, grow deeper and wider the longer the swirling continues, occasionally merging with neighboring pits to form larger basins with strangely smooth, almost polished walls. A visitor peering into the plunge pool of an old waterfall may be looking down into a shape that took thousands of years of patient, circular grinding to form, shaped not by any single dramatic force, but by the quiet repetition of the same small stones turning over and over in the same quiet current. The mist and spray thrown into the air by a falling waterfall often creates a narrow band of unusually humid, temperate air that persists even when the surrounding landscape is dry or harsh. Within this delicate zone, mosses, ferns, and small flowering plants can thrive in conditions found nowhere else nearby, forming a tiny green sanctuary clinging to bare rock. Insects and amphibians that need constant moisture may live their entire lives within just a few meters of the falling water, never venturing beyond the reach of the spray. In this way, a single waterfall can support a miniature ecosystem entirely of its own making, a hidden garden sustained purely by the byproduct of gravity pulling water over a ledge. Not every sound that a waterfall makes can be heard by human ears. Alongside the audible roar and hiss, falling water also generates deep, slow vibrations known as infrasound, oscillations so low in frequency that they pass beneath the threshold of hearing while still moving through air, rock, and even the human body. These vibrations can travel remarkable distances through the ground, sometimes detected far from the waterfall itself, by sensitive instruments long before any observer arrives close enough to hear the falls directly. Some animals may sense these deep vibrations even when they cannot yet see or hear the waterfall producing them, responding to a presence announced entirely through touch carried on solid ground. The simple act of water breaking apart as it falls can generate small electrical charges through friction and separation, a process related to the same physics that lets a balloon cling to a wall after rubbing it against hair. As droplets shatter against rock, other droplets, or rising air, positive and negative charges can separate briefly before recombining or drifting away in the spray. Near larger falls, sensitive equipment can sometimes detect these fluctuating fields hovering in the charged mist. It is a strange thought that a waterfall, appearing to be nothing but water and stone, quietly hums with a faint electrical breath produced by nothing more than gravity and collision. Some waterfalls exist for only a few hours or days each year, appearing suddenly after heavy rainfall and vanishing again as the ground dries. These ephemeral falls form when temporary channels fill faster than they can drain, sending a rush of water spilling over a ledge that spends most of the year silent and bare. Travelers who happen to pass at just the right moment may witness a dramatic curtain of white water pouring down a cliff that, only days before, looked like nothing more than ordinary stone. By the time they return, the waterfall may have disappeared entirely, leaving behind only a faint stain on the rock as the only evidence that it had ever existed at all. Across long spans of time, a waterfall can carve an entire canyon simply by staying in one place long enough for the rock beneath it to give way, retreat, and give way again. As the falling water wears through a resistant cap layer of stone, it exposes softer material beneath, which erodes more quickly and undermines the ledge above until it collapses. The waterfall then reestablishes itself a short distance upstream, repeating the same process over and over across thousands of years. The long, narrow gorge left behind traces the exact path the waterfall has slowly walked backward through the landscape, a quiet river of time written into solid rock. The sheer volume of water broken into fine droplets by a large waterfall can measurably cool and humidify the air in its immediate surroundings, creating a noticeably different climate than the drier land just a short distance away. This localized cooling can influence wind patterns on a small scale, drawing gentle breezes toward the falls as warmer air rises and cooler, mist-laden air sinks and spreads outward along the ground. Visitors often notice this shift immediately, feeling the air grow cooler and heavier on their skin as they approach, long before the sound of the falls becomes loud enough to explain the sensation on its own. In certain warm, humid regions, the forests surrounding waterfalls can come alive after dark with soft, drifting points of light. Fireflies are drawn to the moist, stable air near falling water, and their rhythmic glow can appear to hover in loose clouds just beyond the spray. In some places, bioluminescent fungi growing on damp, decaying wood near the base of a waterfall add a second, steadier light source, a faint greenish glow rising from the forest floor itself. Together, these small living lights turn the darkness around a waterfall into something gently otherworldly, as though the waterfall's endless motion had summoned quiet constellations to settle in the undergrowth nearby. The steady, layered hiss produced by falling water is often described as one of the most effective natural sounds for easing a restless mind toward sleep. Unlike sounds with sharp peaks or sudden changes, the broad wash of a waterfall's noise lacks any single moment that draws sudden attention, allowing the listening mind to settle into it rather than startle against it. Recordings of waterfalls are used in quiet rooms, sleep machines, and meditation spaces precisely because they mimic this natural, even blanket of sound. Something in the steady randomness of falling water seems to match a frequency the mind is willing to let go of noticing, no longer bracing to interpret it as anything, and simply resting inside it instead. Where the plunge pool at the base of a waterfall has eroded the stone unevenly, hollow spaces sometimes open up directly behind the sheet of falling water, forming natural chambers hidden from view by the curtain of the falls itself. These pockets can be reached by carefully walking along a narrow ledge behind the water, entering a space where the roar becomes muffled and strange, filtered through a wall of moving liquid rather than open air. Light passing through the falling water from outside can create a shifting, watery glow inside these hidden chambers, turning a simple cave into something that feels closer to standing inside the waterfall than merely beside it. A waterfall does not just wear away the rock it falls upon. It also carries sediment, gravel, and sometimes large boulders downstream, redistributing material picked up during flood events or dislodged from the crumbling cliff face above. Over time, this transported material builds gravel bars, shifts the course of the river below, and shapes the surrounding floodplain in ways that ripple outward far beyond the falls themselves. A single waterfall, then, is not an isolated feature, but part of a much longer conversation between water, stone, and gravity that continues for many miles downstream from where the falling water first strikes the pool below. Throughout much of human history, the loud, unmistakable presence of a waterfall made it a natural landmark for travelers, traders, and mapmakers long before precise surveying tools existed. Settlements often grew near these falls, drawn by the promise of fish, fresh water, and later the mechanical power that falling water could provide to early mills. In some regions, waterfalls marked the edge of navigable rivers, forcing travelers to portage their boats and goods around the falls on foot, turning the site into a natural gathering point for trade and rest. Long before anyone thought to study their geology, waterfalls had already shaped the movement of people across entire continents simply by being impossible to pass through quietly. When falling water is channeled through turbines, its constant motion can be converted directly into electricity, a process that early engineers first tested at natural waterfalls before building specialized dams entirely for this purpose. The height of a fall and the volume of water passing over it together determine how much power can be captured, which is why some of the largest hydroelectric stations in the world are built near waterfalls that combine both height and enormous flow. In many towns that grew up beside smaller falls, the earliest source of mechanical power came directly from wooden water wheels turning in the current, grinding grain or driving simple machinery, long before anyone imagined wires carrying that same energy into distant homes. The steep rock walls that often surround a waterfall can behave like a natural amplifier, reflecting and layering sound in ways that change dramatically depending on where a listener stands. Close to the base, the roar can feel like a single overwhelming wall of noise, while a short distance away, echoes bouncing between canyon walls can separate that same sound into distinct overlapping layers, almost like several waterfalls speaking at slightly different times. Some canyons are shaped in such a way that a single clap or shout near the falls returns as a long, rolling echo, blending with the ongoing rush of water until it becomes difficult to tell where the original sound ends and the reflection begins. In certain waterfalls, water rich in dissolved minerals slowly deposits smooth, pale stone as it flows and evaporates along exposed rock surfaces, gradually building terraces, ledges, and rounded formations layer by layer. This mineral deposit, often pale and almost creamy in color, can transform an ordinary rock face into a series of gentle stepped pools, each one lined with the accumulated residue of centuries of flowing, mineral-laden water. These formations continue to grow slowly for as long as the water keeps flowing across them, meaning that a waterfall of this kind is quite literally building its own architecture, one impossibly thin mineral layer at a time. For fish attempting to travel upstream to reach spawning grounds, a waterfall can present an obstacle that some species have evolved remarkable strategies to overcome. Certain migratory fish gather at the base of falls in large numbers, repeatedly leaping against the force of the falling water until they find enough lift and timing to clear the ledge above. Where the drop is too steep or too high for natural leaping, human-built fish ladders sometimes provide a stepped alternative route, allowing these determined travelers to bypass the falls in manageable stages. The presence or absence of a passable route past a single waterfall can shape the genetic history of an entire river system, deciding which populations mix freely and which remain separated for generations. The narrow, steep walls that often frame a waterfall can act like a funnel for moving air, concentrating and accelerating gentle breezes into stronger, steadier winds as they pass through the gorge. Cooler air settling near the base of the falls can be drawn downstream along the canyon floor, creating a persistent, mild current that visitors often notice as a soft, continuous breath moving past them even on otherwise still days. This funneling effect can also carry the fine mist of the waterfall much farther downstream than the water itself would ever travel, spreading a faint, cooling dampness along the length of the gorge. Certain species of swift build their nests directly on the wet rock faces beside or even behind a waterfall, choosing a location that seems almost impossibly precarious, yet offers remarkable protection from most predators. These birds fly directly through the falling curtain of water at high speed to reach their nesting ledges, timing their approach carefully to avoid the heaviest part of the flow. The constant spray keeps the surrounding rock slick and difficult for other animals to climb, turning the danger of the waterfall into a kind of natural fortress for a bird small and skilled enough to use it as a home. At the base of many waterfalls, the plunging water creates a powerful recirculating current, sometimes strong enough to hold a floating object in place, cycling it downward, along the bottom, and back up again rather than allowing it to drift downstream. This same churning motion also pulls a surprising amount of air down into the water, filling the plunge pool with countless tiny bubbles that scatter light and give the water its pale, foaming color near the base of the falls. Because this recirculating force can be strong enough to overpower a swimmer, many waterfalls that look calm and inviting from a distance conceal currents at their base that are anything but gentle. In a small number of places around the world, waterfalls are fed not by ordinary rainfall or snowmelt, but by naturally heated water rising from deep underground. These falls can remain steaming even in the coldest months, their warm water meeting frigid air and producing thick, drifting clouds of mist that rise long before the water reaches the pool below. Nearby vegetation often responds to this unusual warmth, growing more densely around the edges of a geothermal waterfall than in the surrounding cold landscape, forming a small ring of unexpected green fed entirely by heat rising from far beneath the surface. The particular sound a waterfall makes is shaped in part by the type of rock it falls upon. Water striking dense, hard granite tends to produce a sharper, more percussive sound, while water falling onto softer limestone or onto already deep, cushioning pools can produce a lower, more muffled roar. Even the shape of the plunge pool matters, as a deep, wide pool absorbs and softens the impact of falling water far more than a shallow, rocky basin. Two waterfalls with nearly identical height and flow can therefore sound entirely different from one another, each carrying its own particular voice, shaped by the exact stone and water that built it. Waterfalls do not fall silent or still after the sun sets. In darkness, the motion of falling water becomes something felt more than seen, a steady presence marked almost entirely by sound, and by faint gleams of moonlight or starlight catching briefly on spray before disappearing again. Many who visit waterfalls at night describe a heightened sense of stillness surrounding the noise, as though the darkness strips away every distraction except the water itself. Watching or simply listening to a waterfall after dark, with its endless unseen motion and unbroken sound, has a way of drawing the mind away from thought entirely, settling it instead into a long, wordless rhythm as old as the stone the water flows over. On humid mornings, the fine spray thrown upward by a powerful waterfall can gather into a low, drifting cloud that clings to the gorge long after the sun has risen elsewhere. This localized fog is denser and slower to disperse than ordinary morning mist, because the waterfall continuously feeds it with new moisture, replacing what evaporates or drifts away almost as quickly as it disappears. Photographers and early travelers have long been drawn to this soft, glowing haze, which can catch the first light of day and turn an entire gorge into something that looks lit from within. A small private weather system created and sustained entirely by one patch of falling water. The particular voice of a waterfall changes with the passing of the seasons, shifting from a thin, delicate trickle during dry months to a deep, thunderous roar once rain or melting snow swells the river above it. In quieter seasons, individual splashes and trickles can be heard almost separately, like many small voices taking gentle turns. In flood season, that same waterfall can become a single overwhelming wall of sound, powerful enough to be felt as much as heard, pressing softly against the chest of anyone standing near its base. A single waterfall is never quite the same instrument twice, retuning itself constantly to match whatever volume of water the wider landscape happens to be sending its way that season. Some waterfalls seen today occupy valleys that no longer carry the great rivers that originally carved them into being. Long after the ice or floodwaters that first shaped a gorge have receded or shifted course elsewhere, a smaller, gentler waterfall may continue falling over the very same ancient cliff, now dramatically oversized for the modest stream running over it. Geologists studying these quiet, oversized landscapes can read the shape of the surrounding rock to reconstruct rivers that vanished long ago, using the waterfall's outsized setting as a clue to a much larger and more powerful past. In this way, some waterfalls are gentle monuments to rivers that no longer exist, still falling softly through a doorway originally built for a giant. On clear nights when the moon rises full and bright, its light can pass through the same drifting spray that creates daytime rainbows, bending and scattering just enough to form a pale, silvery arc known as a moonbow. Because moonlight is so much fainter than sunlight, these nighttime arcs rarely show full color to the naked eye, appearing instead as a soft, ghostly band of white or faint blue hovering above the mist. Photographs taken with longer exposures can sometimes reveal more of the color hidden within a moonbow than the eye alone can catch in the moment. But standing beneath one in person, watching it flicker and shift as clouds pass over the moon, offers a quieter kind of wonder that no photograph fully captures. The steady roar of a waterfall might seem like it would overwhelm any animal that relies on sound to navigate, yet certain bats roost comfortably in caves and crevices near powerful falls, undisturbed by the noise. These bats rely on extremely high-frequency calls for their echolocation, well above the lower, broader frequencies produced by falling water, allowing their signals to remain clear even amid the surrounding roar. Some researchers believe the humid, insect-rich air near a waterfall actually benefits these bats, drawing in moths and other flying insects that gather in the cool, moist microclimate the falls create, turning what looks like an obstacle into a convenient, ready-made hunting ground. As water tumbles and crashes down a waterfall, it mixes vigorously with the surrounding air, dissolving oxygen into the water far more efficiently than a slow, flat stretch of river ever could. This oxygen-rich water flowing onward from the base of a falls often supports a noticeably richer population of fish and aquatic insects than calmer stretches upstream, since many species depend on well-oxygenated water to thrive, particularly during warmer months when oxygen levels elsewhere in a river can drop. In this way, a waterfall functions almost like a natural aerator, continuously refreshing the water passing through it before sending it onward, carrying that invisible gift of oxygen far downstream. The mist and cool, stable air surrounding many waterfalls create ideal conditions for swarms of small flying insects, drawn by the moisture and the shelter from stronger winds found elsewhere. These dense insect clouds, in turn, attract swallows and other insect-eating birds, which gather near the falls in numbers that can seem disproportionate to the size of the immediate landscape. Colonies of cliff-nesting swallows often build directly onto the rock walls flanking a waterfall. Taking advantage of both the steady food supply hovering nearby and the protection the sheer, wet stone provides against ground-based predators. When a smaller tributary stream meets a much larger valley that has been deepened over time by glaciers or a more powerful river, the smaller stream is sometimes left stranded high above the main valley floor, unable to keep pace with the faster erosion happening below. Rather than gently joining the larger river at the same level, the tributary spills out directly over the edge of this elevated valley, creating what is known as a hanging valley waterfall. These falls often appear suddenly around a bend, as a modest stream that seemed unremarkable moments before abruptly launches itself over a cliff into a much grander landscape below. Waterfalls fed directly by melting glaciers often carry a distinctive pale, milky color, quite different from the clear or greenish tint of falls fed by rain or groundwater. As glacial ice grinds slowly against the bedrock beneath it, it produces an extremely fine sediment known as rock flour, so small that it remains suspended in the meltwater rather than settling out. When this sediment-laden water reaches a waterfall and crashes downward, the resulting spray and pool often take on a soft, cloudy hue, sometimes appearing almost silver or pale turquoise, depending on the mineral content of the surrounding rock. This milky color is a quiet signature left behind by ice grinding against stone far upstream, long before the water ever reaches the edge of the falls. The constant movement of air drawn toward and around a waterfall can create a noticeable chill even on days that would otherwise feel mild and pleasant. As mist-laden air sinks and spreads outward from the base of the falls, it can lower the effective temperature felt by visitors standing nearby, an effect similar to a gentle, natural wind chill produced entirely by moving water rather than a passing storm. Hikers approaching a large waterfall on a warm afternoon often notice this shift long before they see the falls directly, feeling the air around them cool and thicken as they draw closer, as though the waterfall breathes its own quiet climate outward to greet them. The dense, moisture-laden vegetation that often grows in the immediate vicinity of a waterfall can act as a natural fire break during dry seasons when the surrounding landscape becomes vulnerable to wildfire. Because the spray and elevated humidity near the falls keep nearby plants consistently damp, this green band is far less likely to ignite or carry flame compared to drier forest or grassland only a short distance away. In regions prone to seasonal fires, these lush corridors surrounding waterfalls can occasionally interrupt the spread of a blaze, offering both wildlife and firefighters a natural refuge shaped entirely by the ordinary, endless work of falling water. Divers who venture into the plunge pool at the base of a powerful waterfall often describe a strange, disorienting soundscape, unlike anything found in open water elsewhere. The turbulence of falling water pulls enormous quantities of air down into the pool in the form of countless tiny bubbles, and these bubbles scatter and distort sound waves passing through the water in unpredictable ways. Voices, equipment noises, and even a diver's own breathing can sound muffled, sharp, or oddly directionless in this aerated environment, making it difficult to judge distance or direction by sound alone, a rare experience of underwater silence and confusion existing just beneath a surface that, from above, sounds louder than almost anywhere else. The same aeration that fills a waterfall's plunge pool with countless tiny bubbles also reduces the overall density of the water near the base of the falls, since air is far lighter than water. This means that swimmers, boats, and floating debris can behave differently in this frothy, bubble-filled water than they would in calmer, clearer sections of a river, sometimes sitting lower or feeling less buoyant than expected. Experienced river guides often warn visitors about this effect specifically, since the reduced buoyancy near a waterfall's base can catch an inexperienced swimmer off guard at exactly the moment when the water is already at its most turbulent and demanding. The pitch and character of a waterfall sound can shift subtly over the course of a single day as temperature and humidity in the surrounding air change. Warmer, less dense air in the afternoon can carry sound differently than the cooler, heavier air that settles into a gorge overnight, sometimes making a waterfall seem to deepen in tone as evening approaches. Visitors who stay near a single waterfall from morning until night often notice this quiet transformation without immediately understanding why. Hearing what feels like the same waterfall slowly changing its voice as the sun moves across the sky and the air around the falls settles into evening stillness. Long exposure photography has taught many people to see waterfalls in a way the naked eye never quite manages on its own, transforming fast, chaotic motion into smooth, silken ribbons of white. This effect occurs simply because a camera's shutter stays open long enough to blend thousands of individual moments of falling water into one continuous blur, smoothing out the same chaotic turbulence that, in person, sounds like a roar and looks like scattered, countless droplets. Standing at the same waterfall in real time, a visitor sees only fragments, sprays, and constant disorder. Yet a single long exposure reveals an entirely different, quieter kind of beauty hidden inside all that motion, one that only patience and a slow shutter can uncover. In certain arid regions, waterfalls appear only briefly after rare desert storms, carrying water heavy with dissolved minerals gathered from dry riverbeds and mineral-rich soil upstream. As this water falls and evaporates quickly in the dry heat, it can leave behind delicate crusts of salt and other minerals clinging to the surrounding rock, a fragile white residue marking where water briefly existed in a landscape that spends most of the year completely dry. These fleeting desert waterfalls, existing for only hours before the heat reclaims the land, leave behind a kind of ghost image of themselves, a pale mineral outline that lingers long after the water itself has vanished into the sand. At the base of very tall waterfalls, the sheer force of falling air can stir small, spinning currents that lift loose leaves, dust, or fine spray into brief, swirling columns near the plunge pool. These miniature vortices form as air displaced by the falling water rushes outward and curls back on itself, briefly organizing into a small, spinning column before dispersing again into the surrounding turbulence. Visitors standing at just the right distance sometimes notice these little whirls dancing along the water's edge, gone again within moments, a small, playful signature of the much larger and more powerful forces constantly at work just behind them. When heavy snow accumulates around a frozen waterfall, it can noticeably muffle the already subdued sound escaping from beneath the ice. Fresh snow absorbs sound far more effectively than bare rock or open water, softening even the deep, resonant groans that sometimes escape through cracks in a thick ice sheet. A frozen waterfall buried in fresh snowfall can feel almost unnervingly silent up close, its usual voice reduced to only the faintest suggestion of motion, hidden beneath layers of both ice and snow that together seem determined to insist that nothing at all is happening beneath the surface. High in the canopy surrounding certain rainforest waterfalls, plants that grow without ever rooting in soil can thrive purely on the humidity constantly rising from the falls below. These epiphytes cling to tree branches and even bare rock faces, drawing moisture directly from the saturated air rather than from roots buried in the ground. The constant mist produced by a nearby waterfall can support a noticeably denser and more varied community of these air-rooted plants than forest areas only a short distance away, turning the space immediately surrounding a rainforest waterfall into one of the most densely layered and moisture-dependent habitats found anywhere in the forest. During past ice ages when sea levels stood far lower than they do today, rivers carved waterfalls into landscapes that are now submerged beneath the ocean along many continental shelves. Modern sonar mapping has revealed the ghostly outlines of these drowned falls, complete with plunge pools and stepped ledges, sitting quietly in darkness far beneath waves that did not exist when the water was still falling through open air. These underwater relics offer researchers a rare glimpse into ancient landscapes, now hidden entirely from daylight. Waterfalls that finished their work long before the ocean ever rose high enough to cover them. The consistently moist rock faces and shallow pools found near the base of many waterfalls provide ideal breeding conditions for certain species of frogs and other amphibians. Some species lay their eggs directly on wet, mist-covered stone rather than in open water, relying entirely on the waterfall's constant spray to keep the eggs from drying out until they are ready to hatch. The steady presence of moisture regardless of rainfall elsewhere makes these misty zones remarkably reliable nurseries, sheltered corners of a landscape where a waterfall's endless spray quietly guarantees the right conditions for new life, season after season. Where a river descends through a series of small, stepped ledges rather than one single dramatic drop, each stage of the fall produces its own overlapping layer of sound, blending together into a complex, rhythmic hush, unlike the more uniform roar of a single tall waterfall. Standing at different points along such a staircase of falls, a listener can pick out subtly different combinations of splash and rush, as though walking slowly past several distinct instruments all playing quiet variations of the same underlying song. This layered acoustic texture gives staircase waterfalls a particular kind of restless, shifting calm that differs meaningfully from the steadier, single-tone presence of a taller, unbroken fall. Where ancient lava once cooled slowly and evenly, it can crack into long, hexagonal columns standing side by side like a tightly packed bundle of pillars. When a river later carves through this columnar basalt, the resulting waterfall often falls over a distinctly geometric edge, with water pouring between and across the tops of countless straight-sided pillars rather than a single smooth, rounded ledge. This gives certain waterfalls an almost architectural appearance, as though the falling water had chosen to pour itself over a structure too precise and orderly to have formed naturally, even though nothing human ever shaped it at all. Before mechanical refrigeration existed, communities living near certain waterfalls took advantage of the thick ice that formed nearby each winter, cutting large blocks free and storing them in insulated ice houses to last through the warmer months ahead. The consistent cold and steady moisture around a frozen waterfall often produced unusually clear, dense ice well suited to this purpose, prized for melting more slowly than ice formed elsewhere. This seasonal harvest, repeated year after year, turned a purely natural feature into a quiet, essential part of daily life long before anyone could keep food cold with anything other than ice cut directly from a frozen waterfall's edge. The churning, oxygen-rich water at the base of many waterfalls attracts more than just fish. Otters and other playful mammals are often drawn to these plunge pools, sliding down wet rocks, diving through the turbulence, and chasing one another through the froth in behavior that looks remarkably like simple enjoyment rather than any practical necessity. Researchers who study play in animals often point to these waterfall visits as some of the clearest examples of an animal engaging with its environment purely for the pleasure of the sensation, using the same falling water that shapes rock and carries sediment as nothing more than a source of delight. The practice of slowly, quietly immersing oneself in a natural setting, sometimes called forest bathing, often draws people specifically toward waterfalls, where the combination of humidity, cooler air, and the particular charged quality of the mist seems to deepen the sense of calm the practice is meant to encourage. Visitors describe a noticeable shift in mood after spending unhurried time near falling water, though researchers are still working to fully untangle how much of this comes from the sound, the negative ions, the cooler temperature, or simply the uninterrupted stillness of paying attention to one thing for a long, unhurried while. Whatever the exact cause, a waterfall seems to offer an unusually direct path toward the kind of quiet attention that this practice is built around. The narrow, steep-walled gorges that waterfalls often carve into a landscape have long presented both an obstacle and an opportunity for the people living nearby. Where a canyon becomes too deep or narrow to cross safely on foot, communities have sometimes built bridges directly across the gorge just below or above a waterfall, taking advantage of the naturally narrowed passage the falling water created over centuries of erosion. These crossings often become landmarks in their own right, offering travelers a rare vantage point directly above the falls, close enough to feel the spray rising up from below while looking down into a channel carved entirely by the water now passing beneath their feet. A shifting wind can noticeably alter how a waterfall sounds to someone standing nearby, carrying the roar more directly toward a listener at some moments and softening or redirecting it at others. When wind blows steadily from the base of the falls toward an observer, the sound can feel full and immediate, arriving with very little delay or distortion. When the wind shifts to blow across the gorge instead, that same waterfall can seem to soften, its sound bending and scattering along a different path before it reaches the ear. This means that even without the waterfall itself changing at all, the experience of listening to it can shift meaningfully depending on nothing more than which direction the air happens to be moving that day. Under the right combination of strong wind and a particularly powerful waterfall, fine mist thrown into the air can be carried for a surprising distance beyond the falls themselves, sometimes settling as a faint dampness on roads, fields, or forests more than a kilometer away. Visitors approaching from downwind occasionally notice this drifting moisture on their skin or clothing long before the sound of the waterfall becomes clearly audible, a subtle advance signal carried entirely on the wind. In this way, the reach of a waterfall extends quietly beyond what can be seen or heard, touching the surrounding landscape in ways that are easy to overlook, unless someone happens to be paying close attention to the air itself. Below many dams, engineers sometimes design controlled waterfalls or cascading spillways specifically to reintroduce oxygen into water that has spent time sitting in the still, deep water of a reservoir. Water drawn from the lower, cooler layers of a reservoir can be low in dissolved oxygen, and allowing it to tumble and splash down an engineered cascade before rejoining the river below helps restore the oxygen levels that fish and other aquatic life depend on downstream. In this way, even an artificial, carefully engineered waterfall performs the same essential task as any natural one, using nothing more than motion and air to breathe new life back into water that has grown still and quiet. In some parts of the world, entire rivers vanish underground only to reappear deep inside vast cave systems, where they can plunge over hidden ledges in complete darkness, invisible from the surface above. These underground waterfalls exist without sunlight, mist rainbows, or any of the visual signatures that usually mark a waterfall from a distance, relying entirely on sound and touch to reveal their presence to the cavers and researchers who venture deep enough to find them. Some of these hidden falls drop for astonishing distances into chambers no human eye had ever seen before modern exploration reached them. An entire hidden layer of falling water working quietly beneath the ground we walk on every day. Long before a storm arrives at the surface, subtle vibrations from distant weather systems can sometimes travel through the ground and mix faintly with the deep, low-frequency hum a large waterfall produces on its own. Sensitive seismic instruments placed near powerful falls occasionally have to filter out this background rumble in order to detect smaller, more distant tremors hidden beneath it. In an odd way, a waterfall's constant, deep voice becomes a kind of noise that scientists must learn to see past, much like learning to ignore the hum of a refrigerator in order to hear a much quieter sound elsewhere in the same room. Downstream from many waterfalls, ordinary stones tumbled endlessly by the current gradually lose their rough edges, becoming smoother and more rounded the longer they spend being carried, dropped, and carried again by the moving water. This slow polishing process can take years for a single stone to complete, as it is bounced along the riverbed, worn down grain by grain each time it collides with its neighbors. Visitors walking along a gravel bar below a waterfall are often standing on a beach built entirely from this patient work. Countless stones, each carrying a slightly different story of how far they have traveled and how long the river has been quietly smoothing them along the way. The shape of the spray thrown outward by a waterfall rarely holds still for more than a moment, shifting constantly as gusts of wind catch and scatter the fine mist in different directions. On a breezy day, this can create a slow, drifting dance of pale curtains and shifting veils around the base of the falls, each gust briefly revealing or hiding parts of the rock face behind it. Photographers who return to the same waterfall again and again often remark that they have never captured quite the same spray pattern twice, since no two moments of wind and water ever seem to arrange themselves in exactly the same way. The trickle of a small forest stream falling gently over a low ledge produces a very different sound from the deep roar of a much larger waterfall, even though both are, in the simplest sense, the same basic event repeated at different scales. Smaller falls tend to produce brighter, higher-pitched sounds dominated by the quick patter of individual drops, while larger falls blend into a deeper, broader wash where individual impacts disappear entirely into the whole. Many people find the smaller, more delicate trickle just as soothing as the larger roar, if not more so, precisely because its sound stays close enough to individual droplets that the mind can still follow along, one gentle splash at a time. On especially still, clear nights, the calm pool at the base of a gentle waterfall can hold a near-perfect reflection of the stars scattered across the sky above, broken only by the soft ripples spreading outward from where the falling water disturbs the surface. This creates a strange, doubled sense of depth, as though the pool were not simply resting on the ground but opening into the sky itself, with stars scattered both overhead and seemingly within the water at one's feet. The gentle, repeating ripple from the falls softens and blurs these reflected points of light just enough to make them shimmer and dance, a quiet meeting between the oldest light in the universe and the newest drop of water to reach the pool. Certain hardy plants have adapted to root directly into bare, wet rock surfaces that sit constantly within reach of a waterfall spray, rather than growing in soil the way most plants do. These lithophytes anchor themselves into tiny cracks and crevices, drawing what little nutrients they need from mineral traces in the water and rock, rather than from any conventional soil base. Their presence often marks the precise boundary of where a waterfall spray reliably reaches, a living measuring line of green clinging to stone that would otherwise remain completely bare, tracing the invisible edge of the mist with roots instead of any visible marker. Across many different cultures and languages throughout history, waterfalls have often lent their presence directly to the names of the places built near them, with countless towns, rivers, and regions carrying words that translate simply to something like falling water or great cascade. This pattern repeats itself independently across unrelated languages and continents, suggesting that wherever people settled near a waterfall, its presence was often the single most memorable feature of the landscape worth naming. Long after the specific reasons for a settlement's location have been forgotten, the name itself can still quietly point back to the sound of water falling over stone that first drew people to stay. When beavers build dams across smaller streams, the pooled water behind the dam sometimes rises high enough to spill over the top in a small, steady sheet, creating a modest, temporary waterfall entirely of the animal's own making. Unlike the dramatic falls carved slowly by geology, these small cascades can appear or disappear within a single season, rising and falling with the beaver's ongoing construction and maintenance of their dam. In this quiet way, a waterfall does not always require millennia of erosion to come into existence. Sometimes it only requires a determined family of beavers and a few weeks of steady work. In places where a river's course has shifted or dried up entirely over long stretches of time, Cavers and researchers sometimes discover the smooth, rounded chambers and plunge pool basins of waterfalls that stopped flowing long ago, preserved in stone, even though no water has passed through them in ages. Exploring these silent, dry falls can feel like walking through the fossil of a sound, a space clearly shaped by the same rushing, swirling forces described throughout this telling, yet now holding nothing but still, quiet air. These abandoned waterfalls remind us that even the most powerful, restless force can eventually go still, leaving behind only the shape of its old work carved patiently into the rock. Some of the largest waterfalls in the world exhibit a slow, subtle pulse in their flow that mirrors rainfall and snowmelt events happening far upstream, sometimes days earlier. A heavy storm in distant mountains can send a gradual surge of water downstream that takes time to arrive, causing a waterfall to swell noticeably in volume and sound hours or even days after the rain itself has already passed. Regular visitors who know a particular waterfall well can sometimes read these slow changes almost like a heartbeat, sensing shifts in weather that happened far away and long ago simply by noticing how the familiar roar in front of them has quietly deepened or softened. Sound designers working on films, meditation recordings, or quiet ambient spaces sometimes travel specifically to record the authentic sound of a real waterfall rather than relying on synthetic or recycled audio, believing that the subtle, ever-shifting texture of genuine falling water carries a depth that is difficult to fully recreate artificially. These field recordings often capture far more than the roar itself, picking up birdsong, wind, and the faint creak of nearby trees layered naturally into the sound. When played back in a quiet room far from the original waterfall, this recorded texture can carry enough of the original complexity to genuinely soften a tense moment or ease someone gently towards sleep. Anyone who has held a cold glass on a warm, humid day has felt water condense unexpectedly onto its surface, and a similar effect can occur on cold metal railings, stone benches, or camera equipment held near the base of a particularly misty waterfall. The constant moisture in the air surrounding a large falls is often dense enough that any sufficiently cool surface nearby will quickly gather a fine layer of condensation, seemingly out of nothing. Visitors are sometimes surprised to find their belongings faintly damp after only a short time near a powerful waterfall, even on a day with perfectly clear skies overhead and no rain anywhere in sight. The narrow band of constant moisture surrounding many waterfalls can support small clusters of plant and animal species found nowhere else nearby, sometimes not found anywhere else in the world at all. Because the specific combination of humidity, temperature, and light reaching a waterfall's spray zone is so particular, some species have evolved to depend entirely on that narrow strip of habitat, unable to survive even a short distance beyond where the mist regularly falls. Botanists exploring these zones have occasionally discovered plants growing nowhere else on the entire planet, tucked into the permanent dampness a single waterfall creates and sustains, generation after generation, entirely on its own. As water falls from a great height, gravity continues to pull it faster and faster until the resistance of the surrounding air eventually balances that pull, a point known as terminal velocity. Beyond a certain height, falling water no longer speeds up meaningfully, and instead the constant buffeting of air against a falling sheet of water begins to tear it apart into smaller and smaller droplets long before it reaches the bottom. This is part of why extremely tall waterfalls often appear to dissolve into fine mist well before striking the ground, the water breaking itself apart under the simple, invisible pressure of the air it falls through rather than any feature of the rock below. For certain species of fish and aquatic insects, the water above and below a waterfall can sit at meaningfully different temperatures, particularly where a fall marks the transition between a cooler mountain stream and a warmer lowland river. Some species are limited to one side of this thermal boundary, simply because their bodies cannot tolerate the conditions on the other side, regardless of whether they could physically make the climb or fall required to cross it. In this way, a single waterfall can function as an invisible temperature gate, sorting entire populations of river life according to a boundary that has nothing to do with height or difficulty, and everything to do with what temperature of water each creature can comfortably call home. Long before modern instruments existed to measure the volume of water passing over a waterfall each second, engineers and mill owners relied on simple, direct methods, timing how long it took a floating object to travel a known distance across the current above the falls. These rough calculations, repeated carefully and averaged over many trials, allowed early builders to estimate how much power a given waterfall could reliably provide to a mill wheel long before anyone had developed more precise tools. Many of these early estimates, though simple, proved remarkably close to modern measurements, a testament to just how carefully early observers learned to read the quiet, steady rhythm of falling water with nothing more than a stick, a rope, and a careful count of seconds. Because the broad, steady roar of a waterfall covers such a wide range of frequencies, it can make it surprisingly difficult for anyone standing more than a short distance away to make out the words of a conversation happening close to the falls. This effect has made the base of certain popular waterfalls an unusually appealing spot for private conversations in otherwise busy or crowded parks, offering a natural kind of acoustic privacy that no wall or door could easily replicate outdoors. Two people standing shoulder to shoulder near a loud waterfall can speak in an ordinary voice and be reasonably confident that even someone standing only a few paces away, out of the direct spray, will hear nothing but a steady, featureless wash of sound. Fish approaching a waterfall from downstream can often sense the vibrations produced by the falling water well before they are close enough to see it directly, since sound and vibration travel efficiently through water over much greater distances than through open air. This early sensing may help some species adjust their swimming behavior in advance, slowing down, seeking calmer side channels, or preparing for the turbulence they know is coming based on vibration alone. In a sense, a fish's experience of approaching a waterfall may begin well before ours does, arriving first as a subtle trembling felt through water rather than any sound carried on the air above the surface. In particularly cold conditions, the fine spray thrown constantly into the air by a waterfall can freeze directly onto nearby surfaces, even without any actual precipitation falling from the sky above, coating trees, railings, and rocks in a slowly thickening layer of clear ice. Because this icing is produced entirely by the waterfall's own spray rather than a storm passing through, it can remain highly localized, leaving areas only a short distance beyond the mist completely untouched by ice, while everything closer to the falls grows steadily more coated and slick. Visitors unfamiliar with this effect are sometimes caught off guard by how quickly footing near a winter waterfall can turn treacherous, even on a day with perfectly clear skies overhead. Some predators appear to take advantage of the constant, masking roar produced by a nearby waterfall, using the noise as cover to approach prey more closely than they otherwise could without being heard. The same broad wash of sound that can hide a human conversation from a nearby listener may also hide the quiet approach of a careful predator from prey that would normally rely on hearing to detect danger in time to flee. Naturalists observing wildlife near loud waterfalls have occasionally noted unusually close encounters between predator and prey in these zones, a subtle advantage borrowed from the same sound that, to human ears, simply feels peaceful and unbroken. The fine spray thrown high into the air by an unusually large and powerful waterfall can sometimes be dense enough to register faintly on weather radar systems designed to detect precipitation, appearing as a small, persistent blip in a location where no actual rain or storm exists. Meteorologists familiar with a particular region often learn to recognize and disregard these local quirks, understanding that the faint signal marks nothing more than a waterfall's constant mist rather than any weather system worth tracking. In this small way, a sufficiently powerful waterfall can leave its own permanent, if faint, signature on instruments built to watch the sky rather than the ground. Historical mill builders developed several distinct designs of water wheel, depending on the particular character of the waterfall or stream they intended to harness, recognizing that not every falling current could be captured the same way. An overshot wheel, positioned to receive water pouring directly onto its top, suited falls with a steep, concentrated drop, while an undershot wheel, turned instead by the push of a current passing beneath it, better suited a gentler, wider flow. Breast wheels, positioned partway up the wheel's height, split the difference between the two. Each design reflected careful, practical observation of exactly how a particular waterfall behaved, translated patiently into wood, stone, and iron long before anyone had formal engineering training to guide them. The violent mixing that occurs as water crashes down a waterfall can sometimes force more oxygen into the water than it would naturally be able to hold under calmer conditions, a state known as supersaturation. When this supersaturated water settles briefly in a quieter pool downstream, the excess oxygen can escape back out in the form of tiny bubbles clinging to submerged rocks, plants, and debris, a delicate fizzing barely visible unless someone looks closely at the right moment. This brief, fizzing afterglow is a quiet echo of the waterfall's turbulence, playing out in miniature long after the main crash and roar have already passed by. In regions where farmland happens to sit downwind of a large waterfall, the drifting mist and cooler air produced by the falls can occasionally provide a small but measurable benefit to nearby crops, tempering the harshest heat of a summer afternoon just enough to reduce stress on more delicate plants. Farmers who have worked the same land for generations sometimes speak of this effect without needing any scientific explanation for it, simply nodding that the fields closest to the falls seem to fare a little better during the driest, hottest stretches of the year than fields farther away, treating the waterfall as a quiet, uncredited partner in their harvest. At the base of certain waterfalls, the specific combination of water volume, drop height, and underlying rock shape can create a stationary, rolling wave that holds its position in one place, even as the river continues flowing through and past it. Skilled kayakers seek out these standing waves specifically, using them to perform tricks and maneuvers that rely on the wave's unusual stability, surfing in place rather than being carried downstream the way an ordinary current would otherwise demand. These waves exist only as long as the particular flow conditions that created them persist, appearing, strengthening, and occasionally vanishing again as the water level upstream rises and falls throughout the year. The specific humidity, temperature, and light conditions found within a waterfall's spray zone can support types of lichen rarely seen growing anywhere else in the surrounding landscape, clinging to rock faces that are perpetually damp but never fully submerged. These lichens grow at a pace so slow that a single colony may represent decades or even centuries of quiet, patient growth, marking the exact boundary of a waterfall's reach in the same understated way as the lithophyte plants that sometimes grow alongside them. A close look at the rocks surrounding an old waterfall often reveals this quiet mosaic of color, a slow-motion record of exactly how far and how consistently the mist has traveled over a very long span of time. In certain swampy or heavily forested regions, rivers can pick up a dark, tea-like tint from tannins released by decaying leaves and plant matter. And when these darkly stained rivers reach a waterfall, the falling water itself can take on an unusually rich, almost black coloring rather than the pale white typically associated with falling water elsewhere. Sunlight passing through this tannin-stained spray can create unusual amber and copper tones rather than the more familiar bright white mist, giving these particular waterfalls a distinctly moody, warm appearance that stands apart from the clear, bright falls more commonly pictured elsewhere. The color, though unusual, is simply a quiet signature of the surrounding forest, carried along by the water on its way down. For communities living along rivers with waterfalls, the concentrated point where fish gather to attempt their upstream climb has long offered a natural, reliable place to fish, since exhausted fish pausing to rest below the falls are often easier to catch than those spread thinly across open water elsewhere. Simple weirs, traps, and platforms built just below the falls could take advantage of this natural bottleneck without needing to search the wider river at all. This pattern, observed in many different river cultures across the world, reflects a simple, shared understanding passed down through generations. Wherever a waterfall interrupts a river's flow, it also concentrates whatever that river carries, offering a natural gathering point for anyone patient enough to wait there. During a total solar eclipse, the sudden dimming and cooling of the air can cause many birds and insects to fall unusually quiet. And near a waterfall, this hush can make the falling water's steady roar seem to grow more prominent by comparison, filling a silence that would otherwise be shared with the usual daytime chorus of the surrounding forest. Visitors who happen to witness an eclipse near a waterfall sometimes describe the sound taking on an unusually vivid, isolated quality, as though the rest of the world had briefly stepped back and left only the water still speaking, steady and unconcerned, while everything else paused to watch the sky. As late winter sun begins to warm icicles hanging near a partially frozen waterfall, the slow drip and occasional crack of melting ice can add a delicate, irregular percussion to the deeper, steadier hush of the water still moving beneath the ice. Each icicle melts and eventually falls at its own pace, creating a scattered, unpredictable rhythm of small taps, drips, and occasional soft crashes layered over the more constant sound of the falls itself. This brief seasonal duet between melting ice and flowing water marks one of the clearest audible signs that winter's grip on a waterfall is beginning, slowly and unevenly, to loosen. Measuring the exact height of a waterfall is not always as straightforward as it might seem, since some falls drop in a single uninterrupted plunge, while others descend in a series of smaller steps separated by ledges, pools, or gentler slopes. Depending on whether a measurement counts only the single tallest uninterrupted drop or the combined total of every step from top to bottom, the same waterfall can be described with two very different height figures, each technically accurate in its own way. This has led to long-standing, good-natured debates among enthusiasts about how certain famous waterfalls should be ranked. A reminder that even something as seemingly simple as height can carry more nuance than expected once you look closely at how the water actually falls. Seeing a rainbow in a waterfall's mist requires standing in a very particular position relative to both the spray and the sun, since the arc only appears at a precise angle formed between the light source behind the observer and the droplets scattered ahead of them. Move too far to one side, and the rainbow shifts or vanishes entirely, chasing the observer's own position rather than staying fixed to any specific patch of mist. This simple geometric requirement means that two people standing only a short distance apart near the same waterfall may see slightly different rainbows, or no rainbow at all, each carrying their own personal, fleeting arc of color that no one else standing nearby experiences in quite the same way. The bright, foamy white so often associated with the base of a waterfall has little to do with the color of the water itself, which is usually just as clear as any calm river. Instead, this whiteness comes from the countless tiny air bubbles churned into the water by the force of the fall, each one scattering light in every direction rather than allowing it to pass straight through as it would in still water. This is the same basic principle that makes ordinary foam or whipped cream appear white rather than clear, and it means that the dramatic, frothy appearance of a waterfall's base is really just an enormous, temporary cloud of tiny trapped air bubbles, dispersing gradually as the water calms and flows onward. Over long periods of erosion, some waterfalls carve a broad, curved recess into the surrounding rock, forming a shape not unlike a natural amphitheater, with the falls positioned at its center. This curved shape can subtly focus and project the sound of the falling water outward toward anyone standing within the bowl-like space, in much the same way that a concert hall's curved walls are designed to carry sound toward an audience. Visitors standing at certain points within one of these natural amphitheaters sometimes remark that the waterfall's roar feels unusually immersive and enveloping, as though the landscape itself had been quietly shaped, one grain of rock at a time, into a space built specifically to hold that sound. Not every waterfall today flows entirely according to nature's own schedule. Some falls sitting just downstream of a dam are only allowed to run at certain times, when water is deliberately released for scheduled maintenance, scenic viewing, or to meet specific downstream water needs, leaving the same cliff bare and silent the rest of the time. Visitors who arrive expecting a dramatic, roaring cascade are sometimes surprised to find only a quiet trickle or a completely dry riverbed, unaware that the waterfall they hope to see runs on a schedule set by engineers rather than by rainfall and seasoned the way most other falls do. Beyond grinding grain, the steady mechanical power provided by water wheels positioned at the base of certain waterfalls historically powered blacksmith forges and early ironworks, driving large bellows or hammers that would have been exhausting or impossible to operate by hand alone. Entire small industries grew up around a single reliable waterfall, drawn by the promise of continuous, tireless power that neither required feeding nor rest the way a horse or ox would. Walking near some older waterfalls today, it is still possible to find the worn stone foundations of these long-abandoned workshops, quiet reminders of a time when falling water represented the most advanced source of mechanical power available to an entire community. The height a waterfall falls from has a direct influence on how fine or coarse its resulting spray becomes, since water has more time to break apart and scatter into smaller droplets the longer it spends falling through open air. A short, low waterfall often lands as a relatively coarse spray, still recognizable as individual splashes, while an extremely tall waterfall can transform nearly all of its water into a fine, drifting mist well before it ever reaches bottom. This means that some of the tallest waterfalls in the world barely resemble a solid stream of water at all by the time they reach the ground, arriving instead as an enormous curtain of nearly weightless droplets, still falling but scarcely recognizable as the same concentrated flow that left the top of the cliff far above. Migratory birds traveling long distances often rely on prominent, memorable landmarks to help orient themselves along a familiar route, and a large, distinctive waterfall can serve this purpose just as effectively as a mountain range or coastline. The consistent roar of a major waterfall, audible from a considerable distance even to a bird flying high overhead, may offer an additional layer of orientation beyond sight alone, a landmark that can be recognized by ear even through fog or low cloud that would otherwise obscure a visual reference point. In this way, a waterfall's presence in the landscape may guide far more than the water flowing over it, quietly marking the sky path for travelers passing high above. Audio researchers sometimes describe the deep, bass-heavy quality of a large waterfall's sound as closer to what is technically known as brown noise than to the flatter, more even spectrum of ordinary white noise. Brown noise carries relatively more energy in its lower frequencies, producing a fuller, deeper rumble rather than a thinner hiss, which may help explain why the sound of a substantial waterfall often feels so much more enveloping and grounding than a simple staticky hiss played through a speaker. This deeper quality seems to resonate differently with the human ear, filling a room or a mind, in a way that feels less like background noise and more like a steady, physical presence. In far northern or southern regions during the height of summer, waterfalls can flow for weeks under a sun that never fully sets, bathing the falling water in a soft, warm, golden light that would elsewhere only last for a brief window around sunrise or sunset. This near-constant gentle lighting gives polar waterfalls an unusual, dreamlike quality throughout much of the day. The usual harsh contrast of midday sun replaced by something closer to a permanent, glowing dusk. Visitors fortunate enough to witness this effect often describe losing track of time entirely, unable to judge whether it is morning or evening simply by the quality of light falling across the water. In sufficiently cold conditions, a thin, translucent sheet of ice can form just in front of a still-flowing waterfall, created as spray freezes layer by layer across a natural framework of icicles and frozen droplets suspended in the air just beyond the main flow. Behind this pale, semi-transparent curtain, the moving water can still be seen only as a soft, shifting blur, its exact shape and motion obscured just enough to give the entire scene a hushed, dreamlike quality. Ice climbers and photographers are often drawn specifically to these partially veiled waterfalls, drawn by the strange, layered beauty of motion, glimpsed only faintly through a screen the cold itself has quietly built. Across many different times and places, people going through significant grief, difficult transitions, or simply a need for quiet reflection have often found themselves drawn toward the steady, indifferent presence of a waterfall, seeking out its unbroken sound as a kind of company that asks nothing in return. Something about standing near a force that has been falling, unconcerned and unchanged, for centuries or millennia can offer a strange, quiet comfort, a reminder that time continues to move steadily forward regardless of whatever difficulty a visitor happens to be carrying that day. Long after any specific reason for the visit has faded, many people still remember the simple, patient sound of that particular waterfall, still falling exactly as it always has.